Hello, welcome to my first ever Halloween video. So in honour of Halloween this year, I had the idea of combining two of the things that I really love, true crime and historical costuming. I read the book A Private Disgrace by Victoria Lincoln last year, which is really interesting. It's about the 1892 Lizzie Borden murder case, and that was the inspiration for this project. Lizzie's dresses play a really important role in this case, so what I want to do is explain the background, Lincoln's theory, and then try and recreate an 1890s dress inspired by the case. So let's start with a quick introduction.
Lizzie Borden was born in 1860 and lived in Fall River, Massachusetts, America, with her father Andrew, stepmother Abby, and older sister Emma. Although they were a well-off family, Andrew was notoriously miserly, and 5 years before the 1892 murders there was a family argument between him and his daughters over a rental property he'd put in Abby's name. After this, Lizzie never called Abby mother again. She both addressed her and spoke of her as Mrs. Borden. On the 4th of August 1892, Abby Borden went upstairs to make the guest room bed as the girl's uncle, John Morse, had been staying with the family. At some point between 9 and 10:30 a.m, she was struck with a hatchet 18 times and left dead on the floor of the room, where she would be found later. Only Lizzie and the family maid Bridget were in the house at the time. Andrew Borden returned home at around 10:30 and lay down on the sofa for a nap. 40 minutes later, at 11:10, Bridget says she was in her bedroom when she heard Lizzie call up to her, "Maggie, come down quick. Father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him." He had been struck with a hatchet 10 or 11 times while sleeping.
For obvious reasons, Lizzie was the main suspect in this case. Her story changed several times. She said that she'd been in the backyard, and then that actually she'd been in the barn looking for a piece of iron. She said that she'd heard a groan, and then that actually she'd heard nothing at all. She said that she thought Abby was out seeing a friend, and then that she thought she'd heard her come in and go upstairs, where Abby's body was later found. I mean, obviously a lot of contradictory statements can just be down to trauma in the moment, but in her testimony, Lizzie really doubles down on a lot of this shit. Like, essentially she's sus as fuck. Also, if it had just been a random madman, like she said, he would have had to have hidden in the house for a long time, and it's not really plausible that no one would have seen him leaving. Like, it's possible, but like, personally, sure, Lizzie.
Lizzie was arrested on the 11th of August and stood trial the following year.
Spoiler alert, she was acquitted, and here's where I start talking about dresses.
The dress that Lizzie claimed to have been wearing on the day of the murders was a heavy winter party bengaline, India silk, thick woven over the stout linen cording commonly used as the warp in better grades of this material, a heavy suiting material. This was a two-piece corded fabric dress with a half train, in navy woven with a blue pattern. This dress was shown in court to prove that it was completely clean and free of blood, and that therefore Lizzie couldn't have committed the bloody murders.
That said, despite the house filling up with witnesses once the bodies were discovered, nobody could actually remember very clearly what Lizzie had been wearing at all. Eventually agreed it was the bengaline silk.
Bridget, the maid, claimed she couldn't remember Lizzie's clothes on the day of the murder at all, but did remember that the previous day she'd been wearing a two-piece corded cotton wrapper of pale blue with a navy figure.
In other words, these two dresses are incredibly similar on paper, and if, for example, you had to describe them in a courtroom full of male jurors who didn't know anything about women's clothes, they would sound pretty much the same.
It was the cotton wrapper that Lizzie burned over the kitchen stove 4 days after the murder, witnessed by her sister Emma and friend Alice Russell. According to Alice, Miss Emma turned towards her and said, "Lizzie, what are you going to do?" Lizzie said, "I am going to burn this old thing up. It is all covered in paint." With Lizzie a suspect, the police had been looking for a blood-stained dress for days to use as evidence in order to arrest her. They'd searched the dresses in Lizzie's closet and returned them, all excepting 2 or 3 which were heavy or silk dresses in the corner. There had been no stained cotton wrapper, blood, paint or otherwise. Those were silk dresses, I'm very sure, heavy dresses, and they stood there and I did not disturb them at all. I didn't see any light blue dress with diamond-shaped spots and paint around the bottom of it or the side.
Lincoln's theory is that the blood-stained cotton wrapper had been hidden inside one of the heavy silk dresses, where the male detectives wouldn't think to look. Essentially, the theory is that Lizzie committed the murders while wearing her blue cotton dress. After killing her father, she changed into the bengaline silk that she was later seen wearing. If anyone described her clothes before or after the murders, they would sound so similar that no one would suspect she'd changed. This explains why the silk was spotless at the trial, suspiciously spotless considering that Lizzie claimed to have been in a dusty barn for half an hour in a winter dress on a boiling hot day, and why Lizzie later burned the wrapper. What in the world could be better than a brutal double murder with like secret outfit changes and dresses hidden inside other dresses? Like, regardless of whether you subscribe to this theory or not, it's a brilliant theory just for the drama. But like, I should clarify that I do not endorse brutal double murders.
On the 20th of June 1893, Lizzie was found innocent, in part due to the lack of evidence and in part due to the male jury's perception of a young woman as incapable of such a violent physical crime. To find her guilty, you must believe her a fiend. Does she look it?
So now to the dress I plan to make. The switching of the two dresses is such a fun part of this story. So my idea is to actually make a reversible gown. One part blood-stained blue cotton and the other pristine navy silk. I think this is a really fun way to reference that the two dresses are basically the inverse of each other. They're both such an integral part to the story, I couldn't just make one. I've never actually made a reversible dress or an 1890s anything, so there's a good chance this could be a mess.
Let's look at the cotton wrapper first. Wrappers are described by Strawbridge Clothier's Quarterly, 1883, as a long loose robe intended to be worn in the house, chiefly in the morning. Earlier in the century, it was considered an undress garment. You can see how dressing-gowny this quilty 1855 wrapper is. But by 1883, it's become more formal. It is now perfectly proper for a young lady to receive her guests at home in an elegant wrapper at any hour of the day. This is interesting to me because a lot of the earlier wrappers I can find online are one-piece button-down dresses, but we know Lizzie's was a two-piece. Looking at H. O'Neill's & Co.'s fashion catalogue for fall-winter 1890-91, we can see some advertisements for 1890s wrappers and tea gowns that give us some useful visuals. The Bengaline silk, on the other hand, would be for going out. Lincoln calls it a winter party dress. I question how accurate an assessment this really is. Presumably it was considered suitable for going out and running morning errands in. It was very important to fashionable women at the time that the dress should always be adapted to the occasion. I'd suggest this is a smart morning or walking dress.
I'm going to wear my 1886 corset for this. It's close enough in years that I don't think it's going to be too far off. Like, I have bras that are 10 years old, so. And a ruffled petticoat. Again, this is a late 1880s petticoat, so it's a couple of years off, but I think it's going to be much the same. I made this to go over a bustle, and bustles like this are actually still being advertised in my 1891 catalogue, but they're much less ubiquitous, and I'm going to go without. The most challenging part of preparing for this has been finding the fabric. I've spent so many hours hunting for something that even vaguely matches the description, and then like lowering my standards and doing it again. And then I went like batshit wild and started looking at like American Civil War reproduction fabrics and could I get my own pattern printed? Answer is yes if I have £300, which I do not. So these are the two main fabrics I'm using. Light blue with darker diamonds and dark blue with lighter sort of diamonds if you squint. Are they accurate in terms of like cotton and silk and cording and shit? No. I've already spent too much on this project. First question, how much fabric? I spent ages trying to figure this out beforehand because due to COVID I had to order the fabric online and I really didn't want to be caught short. I got 5 meters of each colour, so 3 meters for the skirt, 2 meters for the bodice, sleeves and decorating. I could have got away with probably 4 meters as it turned out, but it wasn't a big deal.
The skirt itself couldn't be simpler. Well, it could be simpler, I could not be making it double-sided, but it's essentially 5 gauze and I'm adding more fabric to the back where it's going to gather. Yes, I'm drafting this using an old fitted sheet, please don't judge me. Perfect. It's also probably a little flared for 1892, it's more turn of the century in style, but I really like how it drapes over my ruffled petticoat. You've also caught me on a rare day where I'm actually making an effort, so I'm getting through miles of thread zigzagging all these edges before I start assembly. I'm even labelling my pieces, look at this. This is because I'm trying to be as precise as possible so that the two sides match up nicely. The waistband is also reversible, but when it comes to the gathering at the back, I'm straight up just treating both sides of the skirt as one piece of fabric, as if it's essentially flat-lined, so that they're nice and smooth. Things look so nice when you make an effort. I should do this more often, but I'm not gonna. This gathering is what's left of the huge bustles from the previous decade, and it also helps disguise the back closure.
The big challenge for me here is draping the bodice because I'm having to start it on my mannequin. You can see here I'm using the pillowcase method I also used in my 1920s dress video. But obviously this is going to be worn with a Victorian corset. So I'm designing the rough shape, sewing a mock-up, and then trying that one on over my corset and making adjustments from there. The problem I have is, I swear to God, every time I hoist myself into this thing, my measurements are completely different because I really suck at lacing myself in. So it's hard to A, get a consistent body form to work off, and B, simultaneously be that body form and try to fit things on myself when my movement is restricted. I can bitch about this for hours. I promise you this is the edited down version of this rant. By my second mock-up, I have the start of something that looks reasonable over my corset. There's gonna be boning in it, I promise it's gonna look better than this. Having done all this work to get a basic bodice pattern, I'm now gonna cut the whole thing into a bunch more pieces. Basically that's because I want decorative seams on the back and this sort of yoke on the front. It gives me a bit more leeway for decorative bits. Obviously I forgot to do this the first time I cut my fabric. Hopefully I didn't waste much, but don't be a dumbass. It's pretty straightforward to assemble the back. I'm being very careful to press and clip these curves to keep it as smooth as I can. For the front, the light side is much the same, but I'm going to insert some ruffles on the dark side. This is a 3-inch wide strip, just twice that diagonal length, hemmed on one side and gathered down on the other, and I'm inserting that into the seam nice and cleanly. And I'm also adding this velvet ribbon at this point for the same reason. I know it looks like having ruffles on just the dark side of the dress is going to throw off the fit at the light side, but I'm working on the basis, and I'm cautiously optimistic with this, that it will work similarly to wearing a ruffled petticoat under a skirt and actually improve the shape over the bust. I might be completely wrong, but it's worth a shot. I'm losing my mind when it comes to drafting these sleeves, and that's because most Victorian sleeve patterns seem to be made in two parts. There's sort of an upper and a lower. They're completely different shapes and sizes, they don't fit together in any obvious way. It's not how I would make sleeves in any universe ordinarily. I didn't know this about Victorian sleeve construction, and I wish I still didn't. So I've cut up about 1 million pieces of paper and fabric, and all that I have now is a headache. Eventually I pulled together something that sort of works and resembles a Victorian pattern, and if anyone tries to tell me it's not accurate, I will probably hit them with an axe. These are getting assembled first and set into the bodice by hand second. Again, not my preferred way to set in sleeves, but I don't want to break my brain any further here. You'll notice I've been assembling these two bodices separately up to this point, and that's because my genius plan has been to essentially backline them. Before I secure anything though, I want to add in some boning and hide it between the layers. Despite being worn with corsets, most Victorian bodices have their own bones, which helps structure them and mostly stop them wrinkling or riding up. I can't leave them like this, so I'm trying to tack them by hand into the seams and darts to keep my stitches from being visible on either side, and then sandwich them in. It's then a matter of finishing the edges by hand. For the sleeves, I'm inserting this trim in between the layers. I've just realised that I'm a moron, and I forgot to bloodstain the light side of the bodice before I joined the two pieces together. In my head, I was just making a beautiful dress and I was so proud of myself, and now I've just remembered that I'm supposed to be committing a double murder. I've had to improvise a bit, so the change of plan for this is to slide some cardboard in between the two sides while I stain it to stop it from bleeding through the fabric. I'm just using acrylic paint for this. I'd planned to do this with the bodice on so that I could control the pattern more, but there we go. The collar is double-sided and overlaps like the waistband of the skirt, but I'm lining it with a bit of canvas to help it stand upright. I know this is way too wide and it's really upsetting me because I made the bodice collar too deep. But okay, that's fine. And then we're just on to the finishing touches. So my plan was to use hook and eye tape on this closure. It was designed to be hidden by the placket, except that in practice I found that didn't work very well as the boned edge just wanted to sort of roll back and show the tape. So I ended up hand sewing 5 million snap fasteners down the front, which was painful. But at least it's an improvement, I tell myself to make myself feel better. There are also hook and bar fasteners on the collar at each side. This dip waist belt is probably more Edwardian in style, but it's called fashion, look it up. And then finally, I'm going to hem the skirts by hand to keep the stitches as invisible as possible on the outside. And this all gets bloodstained too. As always, there are adjustments that I would make to this. The big one is raising the neckline a little bit so that the collar is narrower and just all kind of sits nicer around the neck. At the moment it's a little weird. These are probably amends that I could have made as I went along quite easily if I weren't trying to keep it all reversible and super clean and tidy on each side. So it was a sacrifice that had to be made, and to be fair, I think the reversible elements worked out really well, better than I hoped. It was all one big experiment, so I'm really pleased with it. I would also quite like to make the sleeves poofier, but I had so much trouble just figuring out the vague shape of Victorian sleeves that, like, I'm not mad about it. And also I think the skirt shape is probably more accurate to the end of the century rather than the beginning of it. But it's really nice to swoosh around in, and I don't care. thank you for watching. This is the biggest project that I've taken on in a while, so let me know what you think if you would like to see more stuff like this, and you can also subscribe, which I keep forgetting to tell you. Most importantly, happy Halloween, have a good one, and don't kill your family. If your purring picks up on this mic, I'm gonna be fuming, lad. Cute though.